Good morning, everybody. It's Olga Kostrova and
Jan Hutchins.
so as you know, we are a couple. We've been married now for 2.5 years, happily and blessed, and we decided to have hangouts to share some reflections on what we have learned and engage you in conversation one way or another. So Jan, who is asking question whom first?
You just asked me a question and I'll answer it. I've learned in these 2.5 years a deep relationship with my own urge to defend.
Mm-hmm.
I spent a lot of time developing my ego structure, got to be famous at an early age, and became sort of attached to who I was. And in our relating, I have had the experience of being lovingly pulled past all of my stories about who I am and experienced all of the urge to defend, repress, deny, hide, minimize, just
being human.
And I thank you just to, it's just us as far as I'm concerned, although they say we're public. I want to just bow and thank you for your part in helping me move through that process.
Thank you, sweetheart. As they say, marriage is the best spiritual teacher one can have, right?
Absolutely. And in fact, I don't think I would have even attempted much of what I've experienced in these 2 years, which has so thoroughly shifted who I recognize I'm not and opened me to be more present and more being in the moment and less defensive of some version of myself, were it not for my love for you, which dragged me through more pain than I would have ever gone through for any other person, or certainly for no reason at all.
So sweet, so sweet. And if anybody wonder, we have this change in scenery. Jan right now is in our living room, and I am in our bedroom. So actually in one single place, but the illusion of the technology allow us to present it as a distant conversation. So what question do you have for me, my love?
Well, you have made a shift here lately into an area of understanding around the use of pain, giving up of control. One of our first connections was around this advertisement you made that there is a degree of bondage and control that can be used in psychological ways. And maybe you could explain how that is part of the work you're doing.
Wonderful. Good question. So let me first make a disclaimer for everybody who are not familiar with my work to any degree at all, so we don't have any misconceptions. The system that I designed, and again, when we say I designed, what it means, it's live brought experiences, the chain of experiences out of which one can observe and see what's happening, what has effect on what. My area of interest for a long time has been the mind, the human ego, all subject of freedom, love, happiness, fulfillment, you name it. And of course, every human being wants to be happy and experience pleasure versus being a suffering person and experience pain. At least we acknowledge it intellectually as our truth. My work, transformational work, probably it's not really falling into category coaching, even though we do call it coaching because it sounds like people can relate and understand what it is. It doesn't fall in category necessarily healing. It doesn't fall into category spiritual teaching. It's actually the blend of everything. It's a transformational technology, transformational program that allow a human being to, I don't like the word self-development, self-improvement, because I don't believe that there is anything to improve or develop. What we need to unlearn, undevelop everything that society, through many conventions, imposed on us and hypnotized us with. And we became subjected to a lot of belief systems that cause us a lot of suffering and inner conflicts. So in this work, during the process, it was discovered by me that humans are not easy on releasing different belief systems, even if conscious mind wants change to occur. We also are not so eager to quiet the mind, even if conscious part of us wants to quiet the mind. If you ever practice meditation, you know how hard it is to do.
Relate to this.
Yeah, you relate to that? Yes. To do sitting meditation. That's why with my clients, I never, well, with rare exceptions, I recommend clients to do sitting quiet meditation, because for mind that is not trained, it's extremely hard. And it's not about easy or hard so much, it's about what is the result of that work. How long will it take one to get to some point where one wants to be, and one wants to be free. So the goal of all work is always liberation. We can call it spiritual, emotional, that or another. It's liberation from the sense of self, the mind, the ego. We want escape from the reality, and the reality is the reality that we created for ourselves. My Google does something here. Calendar reminds me that I'm supposed to have conversation with Jan, and I'm having it. So there are a lot of different techniques that were already tried by many practitioners, and people like to call it masters, and you name it. And a lot of techniques involve dynamic forms of practices beyond silent meditation, beyond visualization and concentration. So it's kind of next layer of activity in the meditation process. There are a lot of different, very dynamic forms of meditation. Many of you might be familiar with Osho and his dynamic meditation practices that actually, what you might not know, many were borrowed from a Russian mystic Gurdjieff. In my young age, 17-ish, I think, I was part of the theater school, School of Improvisation back in Ukraine, where we build our practice in relation to Gurdjieff's teaching. So accordingly to Gurdjieff's teaching, a lot of experiments that we did to bring it on the stage, we did using his practices to de-associate ones with yourself. Because for actor, if you know anything about method acting, what is important is for you to dissolve the sense of self as you know yourself and become your character. More you can become a character, more you can do a better job to translate emotional states through the screen or through the stage to the audiences.
And that's a layer of freedom right there, the ability to choose the role to play in the world and play it.
Absolutely.
Feeling identified with any of the particular roles at any time.
Absolutely, absolutely. So to come back to your question, Jan, about what role BDSM plays in the physiomodynamics system as a transformational practice. I don't know how much you guys know what BDSM is. It's bondage, domination, submission, you name it, right? So you might perceive that it's a lifestyle and sexual practices, and this is how it's known to be, yet for the sake of work that I do, it has nothing to do with entertainment value of the process. So there is no sexual experiences. If you come work with me, I work with a lot of entrepreneurs, executives, a lot of other coaches work with me, and Jen.
It might be a good thing to use what you've translated the BDSM to mean in business terms.
Oh, yeah, I played with words, abbreviation, business development, and stress management. And you probably can come up with a lot of other words for that, so we can play. But BDSM as a practice, it basically the aspect of domination and submission brought through a lot of different rituals and gears and role play and so on and so forth. So in our work, I use it, but there will be absolutely no nudity. You will get absolutely no sexual experience, sorry for disappointment. You will get not much entertainment value out of it either. There is a lot of transformational value. So what happens is the ego as you know it, the self of sense as you know it, will be forced to transcend for the period of time. And for that, we use psychological, emotional domination with your permission. Everything happens with your permission. So you get outside of the sense of self as you constructed it by your own mind. But then most importantly, and it needs to be done with care and understanding, so I don't suggest everybody to just go try it at home. We play with pain. So there are some practices that play with pleasure, which is okay, everything is okay, there is nothing wrong with anything as long as everything is with consent of another person. But my focus is a focus on managed level of pain. So what happens when one, and you know, from my practice, what I observe, it works wonderfully with people who have ADD as we know it. I don't like to label it as such, but hyperactive mind. People have very little control of their mind and the speed with which it generates the thoughts and follow the train of the thoughts. So when we induce through, you know, the process of flogging, you might know I have this cool whip. We induce some level of pain, and it's usually to the degree that person is still comfortable with, and it's almost on borderline between pain and pleasure, how the mind perceive it. What happens that the mind suddenly refocuses on a single point of pain, and it stops, it gets into escape. If you know, a lot of spiritual practices are designed or practiced for spiritual liberation, the state of, as a know, state of samadhi or satori, state of nirvana. You can give it any other word, but actually the sense of no self, and it experiences a sense of oneness with everything, unity with everything. Some call it unified consciousness. The words are quite irrelevant. We can call it anything we decide to call it. But the state is the same state, is state where conscious mind is silent and there is no strong identification with the body, with the limited persona that we constructed in our mind. And with that, when there is no self, there is no self that suffers. There is no self that experiences, that perceives, and it's experienced as a state of liberation, expanded state of consciousness. So when we work with the pain, that's what happens. Person gets out of the rigid, tangible ego and escape into state of no self. There is probably neuroscientific research that could explain it. There is probably psychological researches that can explain. Everything can be explained. My job is not to explain it. I'm a practitioner of experience. I do experiential work and then I observe what happens. If I would try to interpret it and explain what exactly happening, why is it working so well, maybe that's because the mind gets overpowered. We become overwhelmed and we escape. And the peace is between the thoughts. The peace is not in the thoughts. All of our worries, it's about past to future. There is no worry in the present. There is no thought actually in the present if we analyze it. So in between the thought is freedom, but the state between the thought is not so natural for the active mind, especially we live in the world of commerce. We try to solve the problems, we create the problems and try to solve the problems, right? So perpetually we increase the triggers for our mental activities. So through the practice, a lot of different practices we do, but this particular element that Jen is asking me, the pain and pleasure and the whole component of domination and submission in the aspect of work, It is designed to get you out of your habitual pattern of thinking and experiencing yourself in your mind, and get you out of the mind and first in the body. Because when you experience pain, you get back in the body. You experience in your body strongly, and it's a first step. And the next step, you experience yourself beyond the body, because you again, it's my interpretation to simplify it, you're looking for escape. And as you escape it, there is a moment where a lot of my clients experiencing what it's called nirvana, samadhi, satori, the state of unity and oneness, in which a lot of insights suddenly become present, vivid, present themselves, whatever the word is. So you can see, almost, it feels like you see the world different. You perceive the world very different, from different angle, where all our ideas, concepts, belief system that create suffering, they suddenly break. So the mental structure breaks apart. Well, that's it in a nutshell, Mr. Hutchins. What else we have?
Well, I'm fascinated as you describe it. I know you pretty well, and we've had discussions in and around this subject before, and of course we're living the experience. And I had never quite seen how clearly what you're describing is parallel to what happens in yoga. Working with a client just yesterday, he was experiencing so much sensation in his body each time I would take him into another pose that it would indeed raise that level of pain in his body to the point where he had to fall out on the floor and completely let go, rest, recover, and have this non-dual experience. His personality, powerful as it is, he's a very powerful man in the world, was unable to focus on anything but the sensation he just experienced and its lasting influences in his body. And frequently people have this yogic experience where they suffer, basically, for the whole period of the class, one level or another of suffering, the body having more sensation than they're used to handling. And then at the end, allowing them to rest, they fall asleep, go into a state of bliss, and come to walk out into the world after the class, experiencing things anew and finding things sort of spontaneously happening in their lives, where they begin to change what they eat or how they sleep or what they do in terms of relating to others. It didn't come from some calculated ego desire to make it happen, but were spontaneous results of living in a different reality that came from the experience of taking the class.
Yes, makes sense, make total sense. So the techniques, the technologies are not so relevant. It doesn't matter, it's one or another or combination of all. People argue, so often people argue one methodology versus another methodology, one technique versus another technique. This is right and this is wrong. There is nothing right, there is nothing wrong. Even the whole aspect of ethic and morale, even that is invented, but I'm not going to go there because we're not talking about anything that probably could be perceived as immoral or unethical. But even that is completely the next level of conversation. Any techniques, any method that you practice and works for you, it's fantastic, as long as you can derive to certain wisdom from that, and from state that is more peaceful, more balanced state that can allow you to feel love and share love in the world. Because, as you know, maybe you don't know yet, but if you do any deep unpeeling, like onion, unpeel piece by piece, and try to derive to your deepest motives for everything, everything you do is driven by single need for love and connectivity. This connection with the world, we call it connection because we assume that we're all disconnected, but we want connected with others. But what it really is our natural state, a state of non-dual. In Buddhism and a lot of Eastern practices, they call it non-dual state. So it's not you and me as separate entities. It's all this uniting consciousness, uniting. Some call it God. Different religion define God. They give it form, but they still pointing to this all-pervasive, unbounded, no entity even, right? So there's this oneness with everything. if you can, through any practices, I don't encourage drugs necessarily, but again, power to whatever the heck you choose. If you can derive to this state to feel it, to experience it, even for a single moment, if you present to that fully, your life will never be the same again. Because even if you experience you and me as a separate beings, you have the memory of alternative experience where you and me are the same, kind of made of the same energy, the same informational field, the same magnetic field. Again, we can give it any names we want, and you can pick whatever more comfortable for your mind, whether you're spiritual or scientific or religious or atheist, whatever. Again, whatever label you want to put on yourself. Language is very limited. It's partial, so it cannot translate the complete thought. The thought is very partial. But beyond the words that I'm saying, as long as you understand what they point to, and if you can experience what I'm pointing to and what Jan was pointing to through his example of work through practice of yoga, then I can guarantee you will be much happier, and the most importantly, you will stop spread suffering like many of us do. You'll be full of love and you will be loved.
And I can talk about the yoga version of this real quick. In yoga, it's called dukkha. And I didn't get, even though I had been teaching yoga for 20 years, the degree to which my identification, even as the yoga teacher, whatever identification that was.
I remember that time.
Is part of this sense of, as long as I'm identified with something, then that puts me in this is me and everything else is not me, which is the barrier to this sense of connection. So all of the stories, all of Robert Anton Wilson calls it model theism. Any model my head creates, whether it's Republican, Democrat, Christian, Jew, American, any of the models in which I separate myself from the rest of what is, are, by their very definition, reasons that I will eventually suffer, because they aren't me. I got to go kill them or something or other to make them be like me, or defend myself from them. Fear will exist, all these other pieces, and I then live in a world that is constantly hostile, as opposed to dropping as many of the reality tunnels as possible, and continually risking this. I don't know who I am. I don't know what's happening. I don't know what's about to happen. It's okay that I am absolutely vulnerable to this miracle, this mystery that is. Yeah. So let me ask you another question. So what is the experience here as an Eastern European, having been raised in a culture that that seems, as we talk about it, kind of so foreign to what our experience is here? What's the perspective you brought, and what have you noticed about the differences in this way of looking at life from the cultures and the experiences you've gone through?
It's very hard to address it. It seems like it's a really vast question. I mean, in what sense?
In the sense that you grew up in a sort of a collective world where there was a certain external urge to create connection and sameness.
Yeah, well, the thing is that, as if we break down the word culture, it's culture, right? So any culture it's still, yes, we say that Western culture is very individualistic, while Eastern, and Eastern Europe kind of Eastern, is very communal in a way. And again, we can break down even that for a lot of different definitions. But it's we versus I, and someone would say, oh, the Western culture is very egoic, while Eastern is not. Well, that's not true. We is the ego. It's just there is collective ego of the group, not even collective, because we know collective as all of us, right? And this ego of the group. And the interesting thing about ego of the group, it can be even more violent than ego of the individual, because individuals, at least, are not that brave most of the time to do some harm on the high level.
Or feel a level of self-responsibility that maybe someone in a crowd, that whole crowd mentality, I don't have to be responsible because I've got all of this support for my insanity.
Right, and plus, cheerleaded by others in the group, we are now empowered and can even have individual ego contests to make some actions stronger. And unfortunately, a lot of actions that right now prevail in activities of the group, they're destructive. Yes, we have movements for peace and you name it, and interestingly, a lot of movement for peace are violent movements too. So let's advocate war because we want peace. I mean, mind can come up with all sorts of nonsense to justify its action, but majority of activities that done by human in the world is activities of the ego, is rarely motivated by any other impulses than impulse of the ego. I know that people will argue that, and I had so many different arguments that everybody tried to drag me in, which I don't like to participate. The fact is, if you really sit down and peel off all the mental trash and become very transparent and honest with yourself, you will really, really see that everything you do out of your ego and desire to get something back. Your actions, as altruistic as they kind of can sound,
help others.
What?
You just want to help others.
Exactly. Everybody loves to say, I just want to help others. Sweetheart, first that you experience the pleasure of being thanked for. And when you do it anonymously, majority of people who do it anonymously, the first reward that you get is emotional reward that you did it anonymously. Okay? So ego and mind is very tricky. It's more intelligent one is, more tricky it can get and build all these complicated, complex nets in which we get completely buried and lost. But majority of actions that done by human, they done out of the desire of ego for. And there is for power, for money, for love, and we can of course go to the foundation of all motives is desire for love and unity, really. Right? And if people would really know that this is the means, all of it, money, accomplishment, greed, pride, all this it's only means, and we want, at the end of it, we want to get to love and unity, then we would bypass all this waste of time and energy and go straight to love and unity. And the world would be a much better place than we try and make it so. I probably didn't answer your question, but who cares? I was talking for entire half an hour.
Well, I have had the experience during this delightful period of my life where I've known you, that it's just joy to watch you talk. I mean,
the mouths move.
I keep on wanting to make my, do my hair like that, and somehow. So you describe this, and what it brings up for me is the sense of, well, then what do I do? How do I handle if it is all a play of my ego and it is going to create suffering for me? Well, then what? What's the sense of being here? What's the reason for this? And in yoga they have a notion, it's called lila, that it is all a form of play. And that if I let go of the seriousness with which I have been trained to hold life, like you must have a mission, and you must get a certain thing accomplished before you die, and you got to get the right amount of toys, and you got to and you got to get the right woman, and you got to have the 2.3.
Yeah, you got the right woman. Can't complain there.
Amen. Hallelujah. Right on. And it's play.
It's play.
And then I can occupy as many ego roles as I choose. I can be the husband, the friend, the yoga teacher, I can be the coach, I can be the politician, I can play all these roles that I have somehow found myself playing during my life. The guy on TV.
Exactly.
As long as I'm playing the role,
exactly,
and identified with it, it's like, why not, while we're here in this game,
absolutely,
as possible.
Absolutely. I can be technology entrepreneur and VP level executive, which I've been half of my life, and nobody stops me from being a healer, a teacher, an ego dominatrix even. Whatever the heck I come up with, I can play it, and nothing can stop me unless the mind wants it, but we don't have to let it, right? So we can just play. And I know that question that you ask is a big question, so my suggestion is as following. Why don't we see how many people want to participate in this conversation and have us reflect on the subject, then what? If all there is the notion of the ego and all there is actually love and unity, then how do I motivate myself? How do I move through life? How do I make decisions? What is my inner compass? What is my map? I know that so many people ask these questions, and it would be another conversation, another day of reflections. What do you think?
I think that'd be a great idea.
Wonderful. So thank you, Jan, for beautiful conversation, which I have with you very often, but today we decided to make it public and see if anybody else wants to be part of it. So
Look forward to our next production meeting.
What do you say?
Look forward to our next production meeting.
Exactly. Guys, thank you so much. We love you. We send you wishes for another beautiful, blessed, conscious day, and we see you soon.